Every good true crime story starts with a 911 phone call. This one is no different. The case against Brian Kohberger is heating up. Kohberger is the suspect in the 2022 Moscow, Idaho case, where 4 college students' lives were sadly taken. The first clues detectives used to solve this case came from that 911 call, and we'll break it down for you. All that and what it means for your weekend on the Comm Center.
On location of your emergency.
Something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address, 1122 King Road.
And what's the phone number that you're calling from?
What's your phone number?
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. Hi, this is.
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened pretty much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, but we gotta go check. But we have to. Is he passed out? Waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20 here.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay.
You talking to them, Shay. I can't talk to them. I need you to talk to them.
Okay. Hello?
Okay. I've already sent the ambulance and law enforcement. Stay on the line. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
Say that again? There's a police here right now.
Okay. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
We don't have one. I think yes. Do you have a defibrillator? Yep. Yes, you have one.
Are you talking to the officer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let you go since he's there with you and can help you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Okay.
All right. For those of you listening, if you're confused, if you're frustrated, welcome to being a 911 dispatcher. I'll try to break some of this down. I had experience like this, frankly, just the other day where multiple people are talking to me on a 911 call at once. This is a phenomenon that happens when someone's very anxious and excited and there's someone there who can help them, but doesn't have as much information. But when someone dials 911 for an unconscious person, you heard the operator in that AI recreation say, I don't need to know what happened at 4 a.m. I need to know what's going on with that person who's unconscious right now. Are they breathing? This is difficult because what we're talking about is a crime, a burglary, and a homicide. We would later find out that 4 people in the house had been stabbed to death. Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Twinkie were also housemates who survived that, and I believe there's at least 2 other people there now who are also in this 911 call. But the phone's getting passed around from one exasperated person to another, and the operator can't even get the address out before the phone's passed away to the second person. The second person doesn't know the phone number from the person who passed her the phone. So we waste a lot of time, and we get pretty frustrated with not getting straightforward information. So the operator will ask to talk to just one person, even if they don't know everything. It's less confusing that way. So we have a person there that's unconscious. We don't know if they're breathing because we're talking to so many people. We can't get any kind of patient assessment. What's interesting, Drew, is that police believe that the homicides occurred in the house between 4 and 4:25 a.m. This 911 call was actually not placed until 2 minutes before noon. So the people in the house that were attacked by knife that had been many, many hours before. And so now there's some kind of doubt about whether or not this unconscious person is breathing or what her status is. You've seen dead people, Drew. I mean, you could tell someone has been passed away for some hours, can't you?
Especially if they've been, especially if a knife has entered them several times. I want to give full forum, though. I want to make sure that we all remember the 4 victims. Kaylee Gonsalves, she was 21. She was a senior. She majored in general studies, and she had plans to move to Texas after this. Madison Mogan was 21 years old. Ethan Chapin was a freshman. He was majoring in recreation sport and tourism management. He was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity, and he's remembered as fun, loving, and kind. And then Xana Kernoodle was only 20 years old. She was a junior majoring in marketing, and she was known for her adventurous spirit, and she was dating Ethan at the time of the murder. So it is a little confusing as to why it took so long to call. This is, this harkens to a few cases that we've had, like Sarah Boone. She didn't wake up until 11 or noon. It happened the night before. She didn't wake up till 11 or noon and went downstairs, and dude was still in the suitcase. And that's when she called 911. So there was a big gap in between when things actually occurred and when things actually called, but when they actually called 911. But this is particularly confusing because there are neighbors that get on the phone. The phone is being passed around. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of dealing with panicked teenagers or late teenagers or early 20-somethings who just, like, it's beyond inconsolable. Not to mention how they probably should be reacting in a situation like this, right? I mean, it's an insanely scary and traumatic thing to be a part of to begin with. Not to mention, one of them actually confronted somebody that was on the way out. It confronted Brian Kohberger, who was later identified as possibly Brian Kohberger. So you could see in their text messages, which is also part of this transcript that the court released because it was a motion by the state, that they were scared to death and they were just texting one another back and forth. They were calling each other. Little did they know the people that they were calling that weren't answering because they were gone. And they didn't realize that until the next day.
Yeah, Dylan Mortensen reports that at 4 a.m. she was awakened. She saw somebody in the house, a man wearing a mask with bushy eyebrows. And he said something cryptic and disturbing like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She slammed the door, locked it. She was in fear for her life. She was probably awake for the next several hours. You got to remember that these kids in this house are 20 and 21 years old about. They got the fright of their life. So they lock themselves in the room. Other people in the house aren't answering their text messages. And finally, it's about the middle of the day, and I'm guessing that based off this transcript, the other people came over to the house. The transcript describes a dispatcher talking, a man, man one, man two, man three, woman, woman one, and of course, there's other people who are going to be talking in the background. You hear kind of at the end of the British sounding guy, the guys on the radio who are the fire guys on the fire truck and all that. So the 911 call was massively delayed from when the attack took place, but some interesting evidence was found when police got to the scene. Obviously, when they got there, they did not find an unconscious person. You heard in the transcript, they said, "We think we've got a homicide there." It was a quadruple homicide. Beneath or next to the body of Madison Mogan, they found a sheath for a K-bar knife, which is a knife that's used by the Marine Corps. They were able to get a sample of DNA off of that from the snap, which would be important and is something that's being contested right now. Some other stuff that they used in this case to kind of build some circumstantial and direct evidence against Brian Kohberger that I find very interesting would be cell phone tracking. And that's interesting to me because I'm a 911 dispatcher, and it's something that we use all the time when we're doing it in real time. But especially because geofencing with cell phones is something that we're talking about a lot in the news right now when it comes to other cases, other important cases. But Brian Kohberger's phone had been in the area around this house in Moscow, Idaho, several times from August to November of 2022 when the attack finally took place. So the cell phone kind of suggests that Brian had been in the area for months and months at a time. But that still begs the question of if Brian Kohberger is the suspect or if he is the perpetrator of this crime, how did he select these victims, right? What's interesting about this, Drew, I don't know if you noticed, but so Kaylee and Madison and Zana and Ethan had all been out that night. They both came home just prior to 2 a.m., a couple hours before the attack occurred. But Dylan and Bethany, the surviving girls at the house, did not go out earlier that evening. They had been home by themselves at the house all evening. So how did he select his victims in general, and how did he select his victims that night? Was it just a coincidence? Did the perpetrator intend to get all 6 people in the house, but settled for 4? But going back to the cell phone tracking, something that's interesting as well is that at various times, Kohberger's phone is on. Sometimes it's off. It went off around 2 in the morning, and it was turned back on at 4:45. And what does that tell you, when it's turned off? First, you got to know that Brian Kohberger is a criminology PhD candidate at his school in Washington. So is he the kind of guy that thinks that he can do anything or get away with anything? Has he seen enough episodes of Forensic Files to know how the tracking of the cell phone works? He's forgetting, though, that turning it off is also something that's rather suggestive. So when it's off, it suggests that maybe he doesn't want to be tracked during that time. What prosecution can do, of course, is take that evidence to say, well, Brian Kohberger never normally turns off his phone between 2 and 4:45. I got to tell you, Drew, I never turn off my phone. If a prosecutor wanted to look at evidence of what's normal for my cell phone, they'll say, well, John's phone is on all the time. He doesn't normally have his GPS tracking on, but let's face it, gang, the government could probably track that phone anyway. And just sending out the roaming signals, right? I'm going to be attached to towers near me. So anyone who wants to review those records can kind of get an idea of where I'm at. So Brian was possibly in that area, and he was also known to have his phone very close to the house again at 9 a.m. Before he went back to his home state of Washington, where he's from, back over across the border to the west. So you've got the Dylan Mortensen testimony saying she saw somebody in the house. She locked herself up. You got to wonder why a 911 call didn't go out at that time. She's so scared that she doesn't dial 911, Drew, is the only thing I can think of.
Well, you're in a house full of 20-somethings, four college 20-somethings. I mean, is it that out of the ordinary to see somebody strange in the house? I'm not even implying anything like nefarious or loose or you got 4 roommates there who live 4 separate lives, and I know that they were very close friends and all that, but like they were all out. Who knows? I mean, they could have met somebody and just said, "Hey, come back. We're going to order some food and hang out." Like she just, I can totally understand her disorientation when she sees kind of a strange guy in there, and he doesn't seem to be threatening in any way. I think it's odd that he was wearing like a balaclava or something to that effect.
Well, it was also 2022. I mean, we're still kind of coming at the end of COVID, so
yeah,
it's sort of a sociological phenomenon that there was actually a time in which most people wearing masks all the time. Like you couldn't go inside a bank unless you were wearing a mask. I mean, that literally happened.
Yeah. So you're let's take Brian. Let's go back to Brian for a second here. PhD criminal student at Washington State University. That's actually only about 10 minutes away from Moscow, Idaho. They're like in the eastern part of Idaho, and where the University of Washington is in the western part. So no, I have that backwards, don't I?
Yeah,
so,
it's the eastern part of Washington, whereas Moscow is. They're both are right next to the state line between Idaho and Washington.
Yep. So a stone's throw, and then once they started narrowing in on a suspect, and they announced this arrest, which came. You've got an entire community that's rocked by these. First of all, the sadness of 4 college students, and if it's a college town, then obviously people are going to be a little bit nervous. But then you've got a little bit of rightful panic amongst the townsfolk that there's some kind of somebody roaming around that's like stabbing people. That's never a good thing. So the police worked hard, and they worked with federal partners, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to make a determination. I think they ran across this sheath, and they were able to pull a DNA sample off of that, and that developed some type of DNA profile. I can't remember exactly the steps that it took, but eventually what happened was they pulled DNA. They pulled garbage basically from the home of Brian Kohberger's parents in Pennsylvania, like way across the country. And I think it was through maybe a DNA like matching service, that they discovered that this DNA
right.
is already
basically the law states that anything that you abandon, you put it down to your curtilage, whether it's your trash or whatever, it's public property, and anyone can come and get it at that point. So the police don't need a warrant to go get that. So the police, they had obviously already developed Brian Kohberger as a suspect, because otherwise, why are they doing a trash pull at his father's house? Kohberger had also been seen to separating his trash from his dad's trash, going through his stuff with rubber gloves on, which is bizarre behavior. Why would you do that unless you're worried about your DNA getting out? But his dad's DNA was placed at the end of the curtilage. So they went and got that, and they were able to see that there was the DNA that they took off of the sheath was Kohberger DNA evidence. It wasn't the father, but it was close enough that it could be the son. I think that would develop enough probable cause to get a DNA sample, to compel a DNA sample from Brian himself, so that you can go ahead and get that 100% match. And then after that, a defense is going to have a very hard time explaining why Kohberger's DNA was inside the house of the 4 attacked students when he didn't live there. We know well that he has no association with any of these kids. That's part of the motive problem. Drew, this is something I wanted to talk to you about, because this is something that true crime often gets so wrong. I talked about this in 3 or 4 cases, but there's this big misunderstanding in the true crime community, and I think we'll be doing our listeners and the citizenry we'll be helping them here to explain this. But motive is really not an element of a crime, although it's helpful to prove a motive or to suggest a motive to a jury. A case like this, it's completely possible that Brian Kohberger had no motive that anyone besides him can understand for him doing this. Can you explain a little bit about how the motive really doesn't matter? It's not necessarily something that the prosecution has to prove in this case?
No, there's usually three reasons for something like this to happen. Motive wise, it's either love, jealousy, or money. So when you break down just about every homicide that you see in true crime or in TV or wherever, you'll see that there are three main themes, and this would be kind of like falling towards the jealousy or love um, themes, because when once they developed the suspect and they announced who they thought the suspect was, the parents of one of the victims went onto social media and tried to find his stuff before it got announced to the rest of the world. Because obviously there are going to be copycat social media profiles, and they found what they thought was his actual profile. It turns out, it seems that it was, and the way they verified it, the way these parents and family members verified that is they went onto this profile and they saw that this person who had the face of Brian Kohberger, I think the profile's name was Brian Christopher or something like that. There were Kohberger names associated with who he was following. So that's a good clue. And then on top of that, he had liked several of the pictures on social media of two of the victims. So maybe he had chosen those victims a long time before that. Maybe he was kind of watching them, stalking them. And then there was supposedly a Reddit post where this anonymous person talked about being a PhD student, and they were doing some kind of research into basically getting away with murder or something to that effect, and went into kind of detail of what the research would entail, and it's eerie. It's kind of creepy because it's almost like the student wanted to prove the theory that he could get away with murder. And the DNA.
This was his doctoral thesis, that he could get away with murder?
Yeah, I guess. I do think, there's, when you're studying to be a PhD in criminology, I mean, I'm sure there's definitely fields of focus for sure. Like, I don't, but, some take the path of victimology, some take the path of the typing of the killers or whatever. And there's supposedly an obsession or some type of reverence to Ted Bundy that this guy had. So when you look at pictures of early Ted Bundy, who ended up representing himself, was an ultra intelligent person, but he was a serial killer. And then you look at pictures of Brian Kohberger and the way he carries himself, the way he looks. He's essentially trying to replicate that. He's trying to do the same thing. And also, if you'll remember, Ted Bundy did some time here in Florida doing exactly what Brian Kohberger did in Idaho. He snuck into a house on a campus at the Florida State University, and he took a few lives of young women. And that's the same thing Brian Kohberger did. So maybe was this guy obsessed with the fact of with the Ted Bundy phenomenon, or who knows? But the thing to be cautious about on the sheath, and this goes to any investigation. You can't rely on a single piece of DNA. You can't rely on a single piece of evidence, and here's why. That sheath is a movable object. So they didn't not only the transfer, they didn't find his thumbprint on the window, which you can't dispute. If his thumbprint's on the inside of the window, there's no argument. He was on the inside of the house and he left his thumbprint there. He can't say somebody else had my thumb that night and stuck it on the window. He can say that he had a K-bar knife and he lost it and he didn't know where it went. And, in the crazy world of defense, actually I went out that night looking for it. And it turned up inside the house. So maybe the actual killer put it in there, right? So you can't rely on just this one piece of evidence of the DNA. The DNA is strong. It ties him to that sheath. It ties him to the knife. It's still circumstantial in a way, because you have to couple it with all of the other things. And in the presence of not having a cell phone signal for a very distinct period of time, to include the time of the murder, is a strong piece of evidence. The fact that he's tied to them on social media shows that he knows them. And all these other things, this circumstantial stuff just kind of keeps building the case. So I think that was a reason, one of the main reasons why, though, that the state did this motion of eliminate, to make sure that this 911 call and transcript made it into the record and made it in as evidence in the trial, because it's essentially hearsay evidence, because somebody else is relaying the information. We've been through this with the Hannah Payne situation. That it's a 911 call. Somebody can come and testify to what the integrity of the 911 recording itself, but they put it all in writing and they put it all on the record, so there's no two ways about it now. But it's just something to think about, like in building a case. If the judge threw out the DNA, they still have all this other stuff. If the judge throws out the digital evidence, you still have the DNA. That's the reason for building a case like this.
And just to be clear, I mean, you mentioned 3 most likely motives: jealousy, money, but the prosecution never has to prove that he had any 3 of those things. You mentioned Ted Bundy. I was thinking Richard Ramirez and some things like that. It's interesting that he would maybe idolize these guys and miss the warning lessons of people like Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez and how they got caught. Something I wanted to mention too on circumstantial evidence. This is also something that really gets misunderstood on true crime podcasts a lot, and because it's what you see on television. A lawyer will say, well, it's all just circumstantial, as if that's dismissing all of it, as if it doesn't mean anything. This is the way I had circumstantial evidence explained to me by a prosecutor when I sat on a jury last year. You've got a broken shower in your bathroom. Shower is broken. You hire a plumber and you ask him to fix the shower. The plumber goes into the bathroom and he closes the door. You don't see anything that he does in there. You can hear him working. You hear the sound of tools. He's in there for some time. And then when he comes out, he says, I fixed the shower. And you turn on the shower and it works. This is all circumstantial. You don't have any direct witness testimony. You didn't have anything else that gives you any kind of evidence about it other than the circumstances that when he leaves, that shower has worked. Would you be able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that this guy fixed the shower? I did throw in the confession there that he said that he did it. Obviously, Kohberger's not going to confess to anything, but all of this stuff, you can put together circumstantial evidence and you could prove beyond the shadow of a doubt, which I will also go on to say is not all doubt. You're always going to have some doubt in almost all criminal cases, but beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that Kohberger was involved in this. And so I think it's important that when we talk about circumstantial evidence, we're not just saying it's flimsy evidence or evidence that could go either way. Suggestive or circumstantial evidence is very suggestive evidence. And I think it's important that we consider everything. And I think you're right, Drew. If we you can't rely on one single piece of that to convict him, because if one thread in the tapestry gets pulled out soon enough, others get loose and the whole thing kind of comes apart. You mentioned social media as a possible way that these guys are connected. Drew, I think you worked during a very interesting time. I know that you were a detective back in the 1970s, and that you used to have to shake people down, and you used to have to bribe people at shoe shining stands for information on what was going on in the neighborhood. Tell me how social media changed the way that you did investigations in general. I know that you weren't always working on important and strange multiple homicide cases, but now people's associations are basically public record. You don't need a special database of known associates. It's just people liking and friending each other on Facebook and Instagram. How did that make your job easier for you as a detective?
It made it easy for a while, because but not forever, because what happens with any good thing, either authorities abuse it, or the courts and the defense catches on and somebody raises a privacy concern.
How can it be a privacy concern when it's made public? I mean, it's on public servers and it's made available for other people to see. Go on.
Well, if you create a fake profile and you're an agent of the government, you know what I mean? There are implications. There is a need to set guidelines to make sure that we're doing these things ethically. And that's kind of where I was. Like at the beginning, it was kind of like, there was like one or two guys that were doing these Facebook investigations. They would just and they were very, very successful. Like they'd hit people up in chats, and they'd end up buying dope or guns off of them and all kinds of other stuff. But they were using fake personas, and then that
But
would lead to
Drew,
traffic
wouldn't that be
stops.
covered by Fraser v. Cupp? I mean, the Supreme Court ruled that police can use reasonable deception in the course of interrogations and I assume investigations. Wouldn't that cover all those catfishing schemes that you love so well?
Not necessarily. I mean, Fraser v. Cupp is specifically talking about like the deception of your words, or maybe not your actions. So when somebody makes the argument, like a defense attorney makes an argument that yeah, you've crept into their social media profile, which is basically like their home. I'm just giving you an example.
Okay, I'm just letting you know I don't like it. Go on.
I don't either, but I mean, okay, like if the Supreme Court says it, then I definitely agree with it. You know what I
Fourth
mean? Like,
Amendment says you have the right to be secure in your papers. I guess you're arguing
Right.
that maybe your Facebook is your papers.
Yeah, I mean, these are the arguments that get raised. Just, like, for example, it was the Wild West for years and years when it came to GPS tracking. So you could just stick a tracker on anybody's car, and you could just passively surveil them. You wouldn't have to do any kind of heavy lifting to surveil somebody, because the technology was outpacing the privacy concern.
We did it for shoplifters even. I'm not joking. Our property crimes guy at our local police department would place trackers on people that were retail theft guys.
Right. So eventually somebody raised the concern somewhere in a judicial circuit, which made it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, oh, this is not conventional surveillance. This is like a little bit beyond. This is cheating, and we want to make sure that we have the checks and balances in place. So from here on out, you're going to need either a court order or a search warrant, and it from there it depended on the judicial circuit. But classic example, like it started off with, hey, we'll just slap a GPS on this car, and then in a cop's mind, it's kind of like, well, I mean, if we just stayed up 24/7 and followed them, there'd be no problem with that. And the courts are like, yeah, we'll stay up 24/7 and follow them then, if that's the case. But you can't cheat to win. They did some similar stuff, like when I was in narcotics as well. Like we were on a terror, knocking out major grow houses here in this part of Florida. And we were using like infrared to determine the heat signature coming from a house. Because if you look, first of all, if you pull the power company records for, say, 5 houses on a block, you get information. There might be a grow operation going on in this house. It looks like a normal house. The neighbors don't really know each other. And you can faintly smell something in the air, but maybe not nothing crazy. But inside that house, it's just a complete grow operation. It's just basically plywood walls, and it's just plants and lights and timers and ejection equipment and all these other things, and watering systems. So that all requires a lot of power. And when you take a look at the power bills, say, they used 1,000 kilowatts at this house, 1,000 kilowatts at this house, 45,000 kilowatts at this house, 1,000 kilowatts at this house. Then you go at night, or you use the infrared, and you see like this house is kind of yellowish, but this house is bright red, and this house is kind of yellowish. The courts didn't like that. They didn't like that we were using infrared, not us specifically, law enforcement. They didn't like the fact that you were, using infrared to see the bright glowing heat coming off of these things. So they essentially said you can't use that as your main probable cause, and there were rulings like that. So I'm saying all that just to tie it back in. there has to be checks and balances in place. I completely get it. It's easy when you're an investigator, when you find a shortcut and it's a gold mine and you just kind of want to like use it judiciously because you're going to have to testify to it. And a sharp defense attorney is going to bring it up. So you don't want to abuse it, but somebody else behind you is going to abuse it. And once they do, it becomes an issue. And once it becomes an issue, it becomes a court case. And then eventually it becomes a Supreme Court case. And then the Supreme Court is now telling us how we're able to investigate and how, but they're the highest court in the land. That's what they're there for. So, I mean, I know that was kind of like the long way around how we did social media investigations, but I'm telling you, at the beginning, it was just kind of Wild West. We did whatever we want. We friended whoever we want. We used fake profiles. We did all these other things, and it's not necessarily that way anymore. It's not that easy. It's akin to a wiretap for certain purposes and certain reasons, especially if they're operating a business of some sort, a legal business.
Yeah, I view the Constitution as a shield against government overreach, and it's the Fourth Amendment specifically designed to protect your privacy from that government overreach. I do think it is somewhat coddling that when you're giving off waves of light from your house that are just invisible, it's part of the invisible spectrum, that if you just use a piece of technology, you can see that they're giving off this heat. I get that it's just suggestive, right? So maybe it's not necessarily probable cause just because a house is hot, in the middle of the night. Maybe they just like to tan in there. Maybe they're running an underground tanning operation. I don't know. But just that a certain amount of information is being made public. It's a phenomenon of, social media that people will disclose things on social media to people that they would cross the street to avoid, the amount of information that's out there. And I think that there's, I certainly understand that employing deception and trying to make buys through Facebook Messenger with fake profiles and all this. I get where some of that gets sketchy and maybe you need to clamp that down, but just passive observation is something 911 dispatchers will do a lot when we're trying to find someone or trying to find their known associates or find out where they might be or where they might live or whatever. Facebook has, at least 10 years ago, was something that we would often resort to. In fact, in my office, we're allowed to use Facebook on our office computers because that can be used pursuant to an investigation. So 911 dispatchers will use that. They'll use social media. And some aspects of social media even have geo-tracking turned on. If you friend someone on Snapchat and then all of a sudden, they just agree to that, not knowing who you are, you can see what their location is. And I know that massive intelligence apparatuses, I think every state has one, criminal intelligence apparatus, where they're accessing Snapchat and other social media platforms with special warrants and under special circumstances to data mine those things to get lots of information. But that's usually with bigger organizations, huge criminal enterprise, things that are going on. This is a different kind of case because Brian Kohberger appears to just be someone who wanted to emulate a famous serial killer. And apparently he was coming across the state line between August and November of 2022. And what was interesting about this case too? I remember when it happened. Of course, it was shocking that 4 people were lost in a college town. And of course, it was, similar to Lake and Riley. We hate it when vulnerable young people are taken from us in such brutal ways because it makes us feel like none of us is safe. But it felt like that case went on forever where there were no arrests or anything. And when I was just recalling when it happened, I remember, like they couldn't find that guy for years. But I'm like, no, it only took like a month. They arrested him in Pennsylvania like a month later. There was all kinds of pressure and talk about how the police were unable to affect anything in terms of making an arrest for about a month. In a case like this, in a multiple homicide case where someone's fled across the United States, does that seem reasonable to you? I mean, I believe that they've developed a profile of who it was before they even did that DNA pullout in Pennsylvania. Is about a month's time frame normal to you looking back?
Well, I mean, a month to get their stuff together and get all of the lab results together and get all of the pieces in place to apply for the warrant. Yeah. That sounds right. I mean, and once they develop the suspect, they're probably going to have eyes on him anyway. So they know there's no danger to the public unless they lose him, like Brian Laundrie. But and you know, he didn't do any more harm. He just went off and committed suicide. But so yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the days of being on the run forever and ever and ever are kind of behind us. I mean, look how long it took to identify / arrest Luigi Mangione. You know, he's the one that shot the United Health CEO in New York City.
Helps
And
the
with-
McDonald's employees are a bunch of snitches, though.
we had a serial killer here in Tampa that was snitched out by his fellow McDonald's employees. That's
Guys,
how
you
he
got to be
was
careful with them golden arches.
Well, there is such thing as a hamburglar, and Mayor McCheese was a law enforcement officer. So, but so think about so maybe the math of this, like how long it took. You know, what I always found odd about this is that they identified him in 2 different traffic stops. So his father came out to him in Washington State from Pennsylvania. They drove from Washington back to Pennsylvania. While they were driving back, they were stopped twice. So I've having been there, I tend to think that both stops were intentional, and maybe they didn't get what they needed on the first stop.
Was one of them in Ohio? Because they have the highest per capita traffic stops, and we might just dismiss that one as a statistical aberration.
I don't know. Did they go through Ohio?
You have to get from Washington to Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
there's lakes in the way.
Not if you go through Louisiana. But so I don't know. I think that they did these traffic stops like very intentionally, and they were, you know, trying. I don't know if it was to get a sample or what. I don't know what the full reason was, but I found it odd when they did 2 traffic stops on this guy. And there's
the only way to really accomplish that is someone who issues bolos for like an entire state. Be on the lookout for an overdue motorist. You'd have to have someone following him the entire distance, and then have someone be in touch with, hey, you know, we're heading into Sandusky, Ohio. Let's call ahead and see if we can have some detectives brief some patrol guys, and have a patrol guy go out and randomly catch up with them and try to catch something. I mean, that's the only way you'd be able to orchestrate that.
But I can tell you that's exactly how it happens. I've been a part of those surveillances. Like we followed somebody that we thought had taken the life of his young baby for, I don't know, a year or so. And when it was time to stop him and pull him over, it's exactly that. Like you have like a supervisor or something else, or, you know, probably in this case, it was the FBI that maybe called the chief of police of that area and said, okay, we're tracking his cell phone. We have a warrant. We're up on his phone. We're listening to it. You know, I don't know any of this to be true, but it's a likely scenario. It's not out of the ordinary. We're at least tracking his GPS. We know he's here. We know that he's going to be on Interstate, I don't know, 85, and we need you to pull him over. And, you know, we already have sufficient probable cause for you to pull him over. But if you can develop probable cause while being behind him,
turn signal left on or whatever it is you guys are always looking for.
I think it was like a headlight or a tail light or something on the second one, but I don't know that those were coincidental. I don't know that those were happenstance. Those traffic stops. I don't think they were, but maybe they were. I don't know.
I had something similar happen once where we had a huge drug bust, which occurred in my jurisdiction, and we're just 2 counties inside from the nearest state line as you go by interstate. And of course, it made the media in the state for being one of the biggest busts ever, and the federals were involved. And I was just like, I wonder if they let them come into this state just because they knew they would pick up state charges here too. And the state that I live in, as you could well imagine, is really, really not pro-drug. And so if they just let them pick up one more, then before they finally made the bust, because They just essentially let him cross the line before everybody came out. And it was amazing the amount of assets that all of a sudden just appeared from nowhere. You could tell that they had been planning it for some time. And so I could believe you that they had developed a profile on Brian Kohberger and maybe had traveled, had gone with him across the country. I want to know, of course, we'll have to wait for police testimony, detective testimony, and things like that during the trial. But I want to know how they developed him as a suspect. How did they figure out that it was him? Was it from this Hyundai Elantra? This is another piece of evidence that's really critical in the case. The Hyundai Elantra that he drives was seen in the area on Ring cameras and other surveillance devices in the area several times. It was known to be in the area of the house a lot before the attack took place. It was seen in the area just shortly after, and then he went home to Washington and changed his registration. 911 dispatchers do a lot with license plate registration. We deal with stolen license plates, changed license plates. We understand how it varies from state to state. For example, if you want to get a license plate to come back from Indiana, God better be on your side, because it's just not going to happen. As crazy as that sounds, it's very, very difficult to get it back. Even from Missouri, states like Wyoming, you run a license plate and it tells you every vehicle that license plate's ever been attached to. So all of a sudden you'll get a list of like 5 cars. You're like, well, you have to like ask the police officer, which of these vehicles are you out with? Because I just got 5 returns. And Wyoming remembers forever. So when you go to a registration, when you go to your local treasurer and you try to change the registration on your vehicle, all you're essentially doing is leaving a trail of suspicious breadcrumbs that come right back to you. He has no reason to change that. I understand that he thinks that probably he was seen on a Ring camera or some kind of surveillance tape or something with his distinctive license plate, and they were able to read it out. The problem is you run that plate and then you run it by VIN. We're going to find out what the current registration of that plate is. So I don't know if he thought he was hiding the ball under a different cup by changing that, but it just was it's just something that he did that was bizarre, unneeded, that is further suggestive of guilt. Because why would any sane person go and pay more taxes to the state for another license plate? I don't know. Drew, any thoughts on the Hyundai Elantra or the license plates?
Just because you have the tag and you have a registered owner does not mean you have a suspect. You have a tag, and we know a guy that usually drives it, right? That doesn't mean that was the guy that was driving it that night. And conversely, it's the same thing with social media. It's the same thing with a cell phone. Like, yeah, his cell phone was there. It didn't mean he was in possession of it. You've got to put all these other pieces together. You got to put them all in place. And that is the crucial part of her testimony, that she saw somebody with a balaclava and had very bushy eyebrows. It's from what I understand, or from what I can remember, they did find his tag. They looked at his driver's license photo and immediately noticed that he had bushy eyebrows. Because you can narrow down all the white Hyundais. You can even probably narrow down all the Elantras within a 60-mile radius or whatever, if you're working in 2 or 3 counties. And I think that was one of the ways they developed that. And then they took the DNA profile. They went to the father. They went to the father's residence. They determined that the father gave birth to whoever's DNA was on that sheet.
By way of a mother, yes.
Well, I mean,
we don't know, I guess.
We don't know for sure. You can't. We weren't there, John. I mean, to your point about testimony, we weren't there. We don't know. Those are just things to consider. Also, hopefully, we've edited that part out, but.
I don't know which part specifically you mean. What's interesting about it is that you talk about a vehicle and you talk about a trash pole. It's exactly how they caught the Gilgo Beach murder. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there was some testimony that a Chevy Avalanche had been seen in the area related to one of a missing sex workers who was later found murdered. And it was the Chevy Avalanche. And at this time, that Chevy Avalanche was a brand new vehicle. And it was kind of this weird, like pickup truck that didn't really know what it wanted to be because it has this short bed.
Yeah.
Well, years and years and years go by, and they're able to kind of like go back. They have a different set of investigators come in and look at it. And they're like, well, let's look at the Chevy Avalanches. Let's see who in the area owned a Chevy Avalanche at that time. And sure enough, they figured out it was just one guy. and they did a trash pull on him and ended up being Rex Heuermann, and they made the whole case based off of that. So sometimes geography can play a huge part in it. Vehicles can play a huge part in it, but these trash pulls, ironically, this guy Brian Kohberger probably would have done better to go to the barber than he would have to the treasurer's office and get his eyebrows clipped down so that he could be recognized as easily. That's something that without the receipt for, maybe we could never have proved he was there. But like I said, you go to the Treasury Department, it's gonna prove that you're there. So anything else stand out to you in this case? Are you looking forward to the trial, or do you think that they've got substantive evidence? Do you think the defense is going to be able to suppress or discredit enough of this to make a conviction
I don't think
stick?
they're going to be able to. I think the test was when they tried to get the DNA thrown out. They tried hard to get the. I think they argued fruit from a poisonous tree, and the judge denied that being thrown out. I think that was kind of a good indicator that. Like they're pretty certain they got the right guy, and they're pretty certain they're going to take him to trial no matter what. So and the rest can be done on appeal. But what I would be interested in is if he follows the Ted Bundy model, maybe not with self-representation, but if he exhibits the same kind of showmanship. He hasn't really given any indication so far that he had or will. I mean, I think maybe he kind of learned his lesson. Well, that didn't necessarily work out like I thought it would. But I'm definitely looking forward to this trial, mainly so the four families can get some semblance of justice. They're never going to be the same, friends, families, and everybody else. But you certainly hope that they get at least a conclusion that they know that they have the right person, that the right person is going to be serving, who knows, maybe a death penalty. But that's the main thing I'm looking forward to in that trial.
One thing I am worried about is, and this broke in Newsweek just about a week ago on March 5th, that Brian Kohberger's using his autism as part of his defense, that he's not guilty because he's somewhere on the autism spectrum. That's something that worries me, because that would be a shocking precedent. But also, we have a lot of people being diagnosed with autism. I mean, they're saying it's something like 1 in 30, 1 in 36 right now.
Yeah.
And a person can have autism and they can be aware that what they're doing at the time that they're doing it is a criminal act, and they can still be criminally culpable for what they're doing. But if we create a precedent where someone who's on the autism spectrum might be able to use that for a defense, and particularly since autism rates are rising, that will create, right or wrong, a far more permissive society when it comes to crime, because someone will be able to claim that diagnosis. And
I don't worry about that. I think that you'll be good enough as the state to be able to prove that autism didn't get in the way of him completing a master's program and being a PhD candidate, and that he functioned at his job and he did all these other things. So I do understand the concern, but it's the same. Look, we had a case that I'm working on. I'm trying to get the public records for, that somebody close to me investigated. In fact, the public records are ready, but they don't have the 911 call, so I'm kind of trying to hash that out. But this guy claimed to be a deaf mute, or he didn't claim to be. I think he was. He ended up being a deaf mute. So obviously he can't confess, and obviously he has some kind of standing to say he didn't understand what the detectives were asking him. And I think he was declared at one point incompetent to stand trial because of his illnesses, not just his illness, but his illnesses. And then I don't quite remember the resolution. I mean, I know that he's never going to walk free again, but I got to dig into the case to remember what the resolution is. But that's coming up soon. It's called the guy's name is called Dexter Livingston. I definitely don't want you to research that, because you might figure out who the detective was in the case. But
I'll not look into that. That's fine. But at least you talk about physical barriers, like that sort of thing I can at least understand. And if we suddenly become more permissive towards autism, though, I think I understand that in case by case, you'd have the defense would have to make an argument that this exists and it's an affirmative defense, and the prosecution would be able to show in every case, how that wasn't something that was happening. But it reminds me of almost like the Twinkie defense, which is something a lot of people don't understand. That there was once this guy, Dan White, he murdered Harvey Milk, city supervisor in San Francisco, and Mayor George Moscone. And the defense was predicated on the idea that he had diminished capacity as a result of depression, not as a result of eating Twinkies, but that he had depression, some sort of chemical change in his brain that made his body change from what he normally had a healthy diet to switching over to eating lots of sugar. And so it's one of these brain chemistry things where that can become a defense. And I know that raged for a long time and is commonly misunderstood today. But I guess I'm just always worried about it. I believe in the slippery slope argument, Drew, and that the more that we give away. I'm also a big constitutionalist too, so don't get me wrong. I like preserving people's rights, but I as I said, I see the Constitution as a shield, and I so often see other people using it as sort of a blankie.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Without getting too deep into autism, because I don't want to like get demonetized, but what do you think? Because I've put a few things together. What do you think that the most logical explanation for the increase in diagnoses it would be over the past 10 or 15 years?
There's some people say it's because we understand autism better. Other people say it's because of glyphosate.
Yes, I get that.
Tell me.
But that's exactly it. We count them different now. We count it different. We figured we have refined what a scale is, or what a spectrum is, and you can place people on a spectrum now. Before, it was just like the kid who sat in the corner and was nonverbal. And there was really no diagnosis for it other than the kid's nonverbal, or he's developmentally disabled, or something to that effect. But now you have a specific diagnosis for it. Well, then there's another hash mark in the column of autism. So think about, from a statistic standpoint, it used to be 1 in 10,000. Now it's like 1 in 34. Well, we keep better track of statistics. It's the same way crime statistics work, by the way. So we're keeping better track of them, or we know how to track them better, at least. And that could account for a rise or fall in certain crime rates in certain areas, because we're counting them differently, or we understand them differently. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a big wave of them. It just means that we called it something else 10 years ago. That's
just to vex you, though. The more broad the spectrum is, the more likely everyone is to fit on it. And if everyone's on it, then nobody's on it. Then nobody has it. You see what I'm saying?
I agree, which would lend to not having to worry about that as a defense for killing 4 college students.
It is interesting, though, just because I don't think that it's ever been used that way before. So Brian Kohberger is kind of going with a novel defense, and it's something that I would like to see played out. If it doesn't just if that defense doesn't just get dismissed before the trial in general. I mean, the judge is going to have to say, yes, you're going to be allowed to talk about this in front of the jury, and we may never even get to that point. So very interesting case.
That was a trial that is coming up that we're really fascinated, and we can't wait to see and hear about. What if I told you we've already covered an intense trial that took you on a roller coaster, that I've been editing endlessly, it seems like. We're 6 episodes into its own podcast. It's called The Hannah Payne Story. And I would love for you to watch Trigger Justice, The Hannah Payne Case. It has its own YouTube channel, by the way, but it's its own podcast. You can go here and look at the podcast itself. You can go to our Facebook page, because it's now a Facebook series. We've, I think at this point that you're watching this, we've already released 4 episodes. We've got 3 more in the hopper. There's only a total of 8 of them. So I would love for you to go and check those out. I think that would be good stuff for you to see, because hopefully she's going to get a hearing. Hopefully, and we meted out the same not issues, but like we applied John logic and Drew logic, and we came to a few conclusions, and we even argued it in one episode. So it would be something for you to watch.
binge-worthy podcasting. Guys, if you want to be a part of the show, you could do that by calling the Jim from Florida hotline. Dial 848-COMM 911. That's 848-266-6911. I know it's kind of old school to leave a voicemail, but we would appreciate it if you would call and leave your thoughts anytime. Those get played on the air if you want us to. Otherwise, you could just leave us a note for us. Otherwise, check us out on all the social media platforms. If you have a favorite, go ahead and look for us there. You know where to find us. Drew, I don't know if you remember this, but Adam Sandler once took a strong stand calling out Mayor McCheese for his soft on crime policies. And he said that if he had the same job as Mayor McCheese, he would have put the Hamburglar to death. Do you agree with that?
He was supporting the Fry guys. And obviously they had a hand in this. They didn't have hands, but they had a hand in this thing. Look, Grimace was the sleeper of this whole thing.
We just looked at the case from Moscow, Idaho, where 4 people's lives were tragically taken with a motive that remains unexplained. Now let's look at a case where 2 people died, and when police officers arrived on scene, the way that they died confused them more than anything else. Listen to the chilling 911 call about Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa.